to define genders, such as feminine gender and masculine gender. In no case masculine gender is superior to feminine gender. That is the matter of study. Feminism also centers the perspective of women, emotions, passions, thoughts, ideas, and the living realities. Feminism focused on women-centered issues, how women are subjected to a lot of humiliation, a lot of negligence, a lot of marginalization, a lot of sidelining. So that needed to be curbed. Feminism made an attempt to curb this kind of discrimination between men and women, masculine and feminine genders. It also emphasized the vitality, the importance of women's voices as authors and readers. It's not that women authors are not reflective. Women authors are not serious. Women authors are not analytical. They wanted to focus on the ability of women writers, that women writers are equally versatile. They can produce wonderful literary creations. It's not that only the male authors are competent. Women authors are equally competent. Even the readers, women readers are also very much receptive, very much analytical. They understand the subtle nuances of literary works, and they bring out very healthy criticism, very healthy analysis, very healthy perception, very healthy evaluation of a literary text. So it should not be considered that the women writers and women readers are less inferior and less receptive, less perceptive, less discerning, less understanding, less intelligent than those of the masculine readers or male readers, male authors and male readers. Feminism also investigates how language is also gender-centered and it used to marginalize women. The male authors used such type of language in which women are shown in poor light. Women are shown as inferior to men. So the language needs to be rectified. The language needs to be properly coordinated and codified. It explores the possibility of a female language, especially writers like Helen Sixus, theorists or critics like Helen Sixus and Irigare. They talked about the female-centered language. They maintained, they observed that language cannot be male-centered. The female authors, female readers should also be given priority, and the language should be women-centered or female-centered. Female language or a creature feminine, they created, Helen Sixus and Irigare. Feminism considers gender intersects with class, race, sexuality, and colonialism. Everywhere gender has made its entry. And once gender has made its entry, there will be discrimination. There has to be discrimination. And that has not occurred today. It has been occurring since time immemorial. Since literature came into existence, since the society came into existence, human civilization came into existence, the discrimination between man and woman has persisted. Woman is considered inferior to man. Of course, biologically, woman is less stronger than a man. The biological features of a woman is different from that of a man. That doesn't mean that mentally they are weaker. They are mentally very strong. Their confidence level is very high. Their understanding level is very high. Their intelligence and IQ is very high. We must take it into account. So gender intersects with class, with race, with sexuality, and with colonialism. It moves beyond universal woman to diverse situated experiences. It never projects any universal woman. A woman whose characteristic features, whose qualities, whose attributes are universally found with every woman. Then feminism questions why certain texts are privileged as great literature. And ironically, the great literature is considered those literatures which are written by men. Under the caption of great literature, a woman's writing doesn't find any place. That is very peculiar. That is very ridiculous. The parameters of great literature should be universal. And everyone should understand what are the parameters of great literature. It advocates inclusivity in literary curricula. So, feminism advocated in favor of equity, inclusiveness, accessibility, universality for women. Whatever privileges, whatever credits, whatever performance of the male writers, male readers are taken into account, the women should be granted those privileges. They should not be deprived of the privileges. Rather, they should have inclusivity, they should have equity, they should have accessibility so that they can enrich their wisdom, enrich their vision, enrich their power of reception, assimilation, evaluation, analysis, etc. Sometimes it is found that feminist criticism is linked with activism. It is interpreted that the feminist critics are activists. What do? They carry out some action, some agitation, some rebellion against male hegemony, patriarchal hegemony. And they indulge in activism to restore the rights of women. It is considered that they are fighting for the rights of women. But actually, they are not fighting for the rights of women. They are fighting for giving a legitimate place to women writers and women readers and women in general in society. They argue that they are in no way inferior to male gender. The female gender or the women are in no way inferior to their male counterparts. So if they are not inferior, they should be granted with the same privileges which are available to the male members in society. Feminist criticism also aims at transforming unequal power relations in culture and society. You know, the power relation is the distribution of power relation or the power structure is very uneven. It is discriminatory. So the feminist critics, they want that there should be equal distribution of power between man and woman. For example, in a family, the mother should have equal say as does the father. whatever say the father is having, the mother must have the equal say. Mother should not be deprived because she is a woman. The children should realize the importance of the mother in the family, and her voice should never be throttled. She should never be snobbed. She should never be suppressed. Mother should be allowed to ventilate her views publicly in family matters, in the presence of all. So unequal power relations should be rationalized. The feminist writers, they pleaded for the equal distribution of power relation. Power relations should be distributed equally among two genders, male gender and female gender, so that there is absolutely no problem. There is no discrimination. Feminism as a theory encompasses different kinds of critical thoughts. What are they? First is liberal feminism. Liberal feminism aims at bringing about equal rights, equal representation, equal privilege, equal voice. Next is radical feminism. Radical feminism talks about patriarchy as a systemic oppression of the woman's voice or woman's position, woman's condition. The patriarchy tries to throttle the voice of the mother. So this is radical feminism. Radical feminism says that patriarchy is a systemic oppression. So patriarchy should come to an end. Radical feminism aims at putting an end to patriarchal dominance. Then comes the Marxist and socialist feminism. In Marxist and socialist feminism, they bring out the distinction of class, that the men belong to the superior class and women belong to the inferior class. This is wrong. The Marxist feminism believes that both male and female gender are equal. Neither male gender is superior nor female gender is inferior. Rather, they are two wheels of the same vehicle. If the family is considered as a vehicle, it runs with two wheels. One is the father or the male gender, the other is the mother or the female gender. So in the absence of one, the wheel or the vehicle cannot run. In other words, the family will come to a standstill unless there is harmony between father and mother. So first is liberal feminism, second is radical feminism, third is Marxist and socialist feminism, and fourth is psychoanalytic feminism. So psychoanalytic feminism aims at exposing the gender psyche. It is psychologically entrenched in the minds of the people. If a woman takes over as the chief minister or prime minister, they make a very low profile of the woman and they say, what a woman will do? How can she rule the country? She may not have that much of grit, that much of knowledge, that much of diplomacy to run the country as a chief minister or prime minister. So that is how they feel at the psychological level. Women are inferior, and they don't have the competence, the ability, the efficiency to function properly like the male counterparts. Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan, they talked about psychoanalytical feminism. Then comes the post-structuralist or postmodern feminism. So the post-structuralists and postmodernists, they began to deconstruct the binaries of gender. What binaries? Male, female, man, woman, masculine, feminine. And they began to consider that both the genders are equally important. Both the genders play a very significant role in running the family and the society at large. So feminist criticism interrogates how literature constructs gender, attempts to recover the voices of women, critiques patriarchy, and reimagines literature from the perspective of women. It's not that women cannot write good literature. Women can always write good literature. Good women readers are also available. They know how to appreciate, assimilate, receive, perceive, discern, evaluate literature. You know, feminist criticism emerged in the 1960s and 70s alongside the second wave feminism. It drew inspiration from earlier political struggles for women's rights. And the foundation of feminism was laid by Simone de Beauvoir. Remember, the feminist critic, very renowned feminist critic is Simone de Beauvoir. Another is Ellen Showalter. And another is Helen Sixas. These are the voices, very powerful voices in the domain of feminist criticism. Simone de Beauvoir has written a wonderful book. The name of the book is The Second Sex. It was published in the year 1949. And this book, Second Sex, argued that a woman is not a biological product, but a social construct created by patriarchy. So, she says, Simone de Beauvoir says, the woman is not a biological construct, but a social construct who is created by patriarchy. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. He ironically says, a woman is not born, but he is made. She is made. A woman is made. By whom? By man. Because man, since the beginning, used to underestimate a woman's ability. Many husbands used to say, this cannot be done by you, you are a woman. They tell their wives. Many husbands who suffer from the patriarchal dominance trend, they used to tell, they used to underestimate their lady wives by telling that you are a woman, it cannot be done by you. It can only be done by a man, by a male member. So this is something, the manifestation of male dominance, patriarchal hegemony, for which a woman feels that perhaps I have some lacuna, I have some weak point, I have some inferiority which has been discovered by my husband. So she remains contented. She remains silent while hearing about it. So one is not born but rather becomes a woman, was said by Simone de Beauvoir. So this kind of insight reshaped the literary studies and foregrounded how literature itself constructs gender identities. Literature also constructs gender identities because literature focuses more on male dominance. Literature focuses more on marginalization of women. Then traditional literature was shaped by androcentric values. It was not gynocentric. Androcentric means male centric. Andro referring to male, gyno referring to female. So whatever literature was produced, especially the traditional literature, those literatures were centered around androcentric values, the values of the male individuals. Feminist critics argued that male writers used to put ladies or women in a poor light, and they portray the women characters as dependent, as subordinate, as passive, and sometimes they are portrayed as the mother, as the seductress, as the witch, or even as the angel. So feminist criticism reveals how such stereotypes normalize women's subordination and silence. So such type of criticism, such type of writings in traditional literature, they put women in a poor light and they describe women as subordinate, as inferior. For example, the critics have brought out certain points in Shakespearean plays. In the most legendary play of Shakespeare, such as Hamlet, there was a character, female character called Ophelia. But Ophelia is portrayed in Hamlet without having any importance. Simply she was shown as the beloved of Hamlet, the protagonist. That beloved who is neglected, who is misunderstood, who is under the command and control of his father and brother. His father was Polonius, his brother was Laertes. They used to control Ophelia, and they prevent Ophelia from making any contact with Hamlet. What plea do they make? They make the plea that Hamlet is a prince. You are the daughter of a noble. They immediately bring about the class distinction of social status. They say that a prince is having royal blood. You are a noble's daughter, and the prince may not like to marry you. If he doesn't marry you, so why carry forward the relation, the amorous relation, the love relation? Be careful while proceeding in your relation with Hamlet. And there is another character in the play Othello. There also a girl called Desdemona who married Othello. But she did not have much of a role in the play, except being misunderstood by Othello as having illicit relation with Cassio. Othello misunderstood Desdemona being instigated by Iago, and Othello also became impulsive. He immediately believed, out of credulousness, it is Desdemona who is having illicit relation with Cassio, for which Desdemona was strangulated to death by Othello. Look at the roles given to the women. One Ophelia in Hamlet, the other Desdemona in Othello. They have no roles at all. They have no voice at all. Nobody listens to them. Nobody gives them importance. They are portrayed as very minor characters. They have no importance at all, significance at all, except being the beloved of Hamlet in case of Ophelia and the wife of Othello in case of Othello. So they are portrayed as voiceless victims of patriarchal control. How are they portrayed? They are portrayed as voiceless victims of patriarchal control, patriarchal dominance. They have no personal voice, independent voice, independent judgment. They even cannot present their views. They don't have that privilege. However, feminist criticism had the major achievement when they began the recovery of lost women writers. And in the works of Helen Showalter, the name of the book is A Literature of Their Own, which was published in 1977, and not an anthology of literature by women. Through frontal challenge at the literary canons dominated by male authors. Helen Showalter's book threw challenges at the stereotyped characters portrayed by the male authors. How women were portrayed as stereotyped characters. Since they were portrayed as stereotyped characters, so their characters were not taken very kindly, and Showalter threw a challenge. Why should women be portrayed like that? When the women writers have the potential, have the ability, have the competence, have the efficiency to write wonderful literature, they should be given equal importance along with their male counterparts. Then the feminist scholars revealed that women had always written, but their writings were not given that importance. Whatever importance was given to the male writers, the same quantum of importance, same degree of importance was not given to the women writers. Women had always written in forms of diary, letters, domestic fiction, but they are excluded from serious literature or great literature. Women writers were not included in serious literature or great literature because people have a feeling the women writers are inferior. So the feminist critics made an attempt to focus on some writers such as Afra Ben, Charlotte Perkins, Kate Chopin. As a result, feminist criticism expanded its boundaries of literary appreciation. Feminist critics like Helen Sixers Lewis Irigaray, Julia Kristeva, these are all French feminist theorists. They highlighted how language was also gender-based. Whatever language the male authors were writing or using, that language was man-centered or male-centered. And in that language, women are projected in a poor light. As if the women, they don't have any caliber, they don't have any competence, they don't have any literary ability. Sixers introduced the idea of écriture feminine. She coined a term, Helen Sixers, the French feminist writer, coined a term known as écriture feminine. In écriture feminine, she talked about the language to be used by women or women's writing, which celebrated the female body, the fluidity, the multiplicity, in contrast to the hierarchical and binary nature of patriarchal discourse. So feminist criticism does not only ask what is represented, but it also portrays or focuses on how literature itself organizes meaning through gendered linguistic codes. They use gender-centric language, the language which focuses on the superiority of man and inferiority of woman. That should stop. Who said? The feminist critics like Julia Kristeva, Lewis Irigaray, and Helen Sixers. Early feminist criticism treated woman as a universal category, privileging white middle class Western experiences. But later critics argued that gender intersects with race, class, sexuality, and colonialism. People like Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, Chandra Talpade Mahanti, they said that gender intersects with race, class, sexuality, and colonialism. Gender is noticed everywhere, and this gender discrimination has infected the domain of race, class, sexuality, and colonialism. Post-colonial feminist criticism interrogates how imperialist literature not only silences women but also erases colonized women's voices. So the post-colonial feminist critics, they focused on how women's voices were silenced in post-colonial literature. Intersectional feminism brought diversity and inclusivity into literary studies. So, intersectional feminism played a role to bring about diversity and inclusivity into literary studies. They protested and they said that women should be given equal opportunity everywhere. There should be equity, there should be accessibility, there should be inclusivity, there should be equality everywhere. Feminist criticism is not only about women as writers or characters, but also about as women as readers. Feminist critics not only focus on the inferiority shown in literature by the characters or by the writers, but They are also shown as poor readers. According to them, the male writers feel that women readers are inferior. They don't have the ability to perceive, receive, evaluate, analyze, and introspect. They argue that women readers must resist the passive consumption of patriarchal texts and ask them to identify with male perspective. So the feminist critics, they said the women readers must resist, they must oppose the passive consumption of patriarchal texts. They should never passively read the texts based on patriarchy. They should write against it. Why patriarchy is given so much of importance? Why matriarchy is ignored? Why a mother should not be respected? Why women should not have their place of respectability and credibility? So, feminist reading strategies involve questioning male authority. They suggested to question male authority. They also said that the female characters portrayed in traditional literature should be reinterpreted, re-evaluated, reassessed, recast, and it should be recast in such a manner so as to produce alternative meaning. Then the feminist critics began to interpret literature from psychoanalytical angle, and they made an attempt to reinterpret Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan, and they began to analyze how the unconscious is structured by the gender. Everywhere there is consideration of gender, discrimination of gender, same thing. The males are superior, females are inferior. Critics such as Nancy Chodorow, they emphasized the mother-daughter relationship. Julia Kristeva focused on semiotics that disrupts patriarchal symbolic order. So she talked about the language, the linguistic aspect, which attempted to disrupt the patriarchal symbolic order. Literature became a site where unconscious gender dynamics are enacted and they were registered. In feminist criticism, it is noticed that a challenge was thrown to canon formation. The works like Paradise Lost was considered as central to great literature, while Mary Wollstonecraft, the woman writer, Emily Dickinson, the woman novelist, they were sidelined. Why this discrimination? Why Milton's Paradise Lost was considered as great literature and Mary Wollstonecraft's writing, Vindication of the Right of a Woman, was considered a work of lesser importance, or Emily Dickinson is considered as a lesser known novelist. Feminist critics argue that the canon is not neutral but a product of male chauvinism. So male predominance is echoed everywhere, even during the formation of canons. The canons are not conducive to bring about equality. They are not helpful to consider male and female as equals. By broadening the canon, the feminist critics began to reshape, began to reorganize, and produce a new form of literature where the voice of a woman was counted, the voice of a woman was respected. So, unlike some schools, such as New Criticism, which gives importance to close reading of the text, objective analysis, study of the form, feminist criticism is also making some political views. How political views are coming out? Because feminist critics began to view literature as inseparable from power relations, like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Marx and Engels, they always considered the economic structure is very important. Louis Althusser talked about repressive state apparatus, ideological state apparatus, and he also focused on power relation, power structure. Antonio Gramsci, who talked about ideology and hegemonism. So, these people, they considered that there is some political aspect to it. And they considered literature cannot be separated from power relations. And the aim of literature is social transformation. For example, by critiquing a domestic novel of 19th century, feminist critic not only uncovers the limited role of women, but also advocates change in gender relations outside literature. If the feminist critics evaluate a 19th century novel in which the role of a woman was peripheral, role of a woman was insignificant, role of a woman was poor, at that time they used to suggest in their criticism that the role of a woman should be very vibrant, very much meaningful, and very much significant. They cannot be undermined. The role of a woman cannot be undermined in the society. When you look at the modern feminist criticism, it is found in a pluralistic manner. What is the pluralistic aspect about it? There is ecofeminism. Ecofeminism focuses on the oppression of women with the exploitation of nature. Who is the Nobel Prize winner in literature in 2024? Do you know that? Any volunteer? The Nobel Prize winner in 2024 for literature. Can anyone say? Yes, come on. No one. If you can't say, we can't say. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
You can't say who is the Nobel winner in 2024 for literature.
I don't know, sir.
Tell me that. She is a woman. Her name is Han Kang. Han space Kang. South Korean novelist. And she is awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2024 for her novel, The Vegetarian. The name of the novel is The Vegetarian. She is a woman writer from South Korea. Okay. And when the question of ecofeminism comes, I am reminded of Han Kang. Her novel The Vegetarian is a ecofeminism based novel. She has talked about the exploitation of nature. She has talked about the oppression of women. So what does ecofeminism focus? Ecofeminism focuses on the oppression of women with the exploitation of nature. Then comes queer feminism. Queer feminism focuses on binary gender categories and heteronormativity. Binary gender categories: male, female, man, woman, masculine, feminine, he, she. Then heteronormativity, heterogeneity, not homogeneity, because man is different from a woman. Then digital feminism. Digital feminism studies the representation of women in media, in online platforms. So, feminist criticism as a whole is evolved as a very dynamic domain of criticism which has adapted to new cultural and technological realities. And you must know, feminism is more than a method of reading. It is a cultural and political construct. It questions patriarchal authorities, patriarchal chauvinism, and wants to recover women from the morass of exploitation, silence, and they began to project women as very enterprising, as very efficient, as very vibrant. So, feminism played a major role to transform the literary studies. And it also said, feminism indicated or revealed that literature is not an innocent reflection of life, but it is a platform where gender power relations are constructed, contested, reimagined, recast, re-evaluated, and reassessed. We'll now take up Mary Wollstonecraft's book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. It's a path-breaking book. It is one of the most influential works of feminist philosophy in the early days. It was published in the year 1792. Remember, her name is Mary Wollstonecraft, and the name of the book is A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. It's a very influential and very groundbreaking feminist philosophy. You can call it a political treatise and a social criticism written during the Age of Enlightenment. This was written in the Age of Enlightenment, and this was written in response to philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, because Rousseau was a person who advocated for subordination of women. Rousseau was against the liberation of women. Rousseau did not like that women should be liberated, women should be given any power, women should be given any credit, women should be given any responsibility. He had a very poor opinion about the efficacy of women, talent of the women, intelligence of the women, creativity of the women. So, Wollstonecraft, Mary Wollstonecraft, wrote this work, Vindication of the Rights of a Woman, which created a sensation because she wanted to present that women are very versatile, women are very dynamic, very resourceful, that one should understand. But Rousseau is very critical of the women, and Rousseau had written a book called Emily, which was published in 1762. And there he had argued that women should be educated only to please and serve men. They have no other job. Their job is to show service to their husbands, to serve their husband and her husband's family. They should not have any independence. And they should always make it a point to satisfy their husbands, to please their husbands through their service. So Mary Wollstonecraft was annoyed and irritated, displeased with Rousseau's views in the book Emily. And she responded in her book, Vindication of the Rights of a Woman. She wanted to extend the principles of enlightenment, rationalism, natural rights to the women. She spoke against or argued against the marginalization of women. She wanted to vindicate the rights of women. She wanted to plead in favor of women. She wanted to prove that women can never be inferior to men. God has created two creatures in Christian mythology. The two primitive human beings are Adam and Eve. They were found roaming in the Garden of Eden. Eve was tempted by Satan to ask for the forbidden fruit in the tree of knowledge. God had forbidden Adam and Eve not to pluck that fruit. Eve wanted the fruit should be plucked and given to her. So Adam could not afford to displease his wife, and he plucked the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. And it is said, after eating the forbidden fruit, they became mortals. Similarly, in our Indian mythology, we have the primitive human beings, Manu and Satrupa. Manu is the male or the man, Satrupa is the woman, from whom the human civilization in Hinduism has originated. So, Wollstonecraft wanted to extend the principles of enlightenment, rationalism. हाँ दिवे देव हाँ नहीं काली करबिनी पा करबिनी हाँ अफ कर देबे केतेबेले କେତେବେଳେ? ହଁ ସେଇ ଟାଇମରେ 29 ତାରିଖ ଡନ୍ ହେଇଯିବ କରିଦେବେ, କିଛି ଅସୁବିଧା ନାହିଁ। କହିଦେବି 29 ତାରିଖ ତମର କାଲି କ୍ଲାସଟା 29 ନେବି ବୋଲି କହିଦେବି ଆଉ। ଠିକ ଠିକ ଅଛି ଠିକ ଅଛି। ଆଇ ଏମ୍ ରେଡି ଠିକ ଅଛି, ଥ୍ୟାଙ୍କ ୟୁ। So she said, in the women, they have enlightenment, they have rationality, they have sensibility, they have determination, they have versatile talent, they have the ability to produce literature. Again, हेलो ओ बोल अच्छा ठीक है ठीक ओके। So they have the entire qualities, whatever qualities are found with the male counterparts, the women are also in possession of those qualities. So Wollstonecraft argued and said, or give a fitting reply to Rousseau by saying that it cannot be said that women are inferior. It cannot be argued that women should be educated to please and serve their male counterparts. No, never. They have their own independence. They should never be treated as subordinate to their husbands or to their male counterparts. Men and women are equally endowed with reason. God is the creator. When God has created man, he has given the same sensibility when he has created the woman. So men and women, they are endowed with reason, rationality, power of judgment, sensibility, potential, versatility, creativity, everything. Women also deserve to be treated on par with men in society. Everyone should respect the woman as they are respecting the man. Poor education and the conservative social structure make a woman very weak and insignificant, marginalized, sidelined, exploited. So that mindset must change. The feudalistic mindset, the hegemonistic mindset, the chauvinistic mindset must change, and it should give rise to equality. And this inferiority which has been conferred upon or thrust upon the women, it is not inherent quality of women. Rather, it is a social construct. Socially, people consider women as weak, so they are considered weak. But that is not a fact. They are never weak. They are very strong. Wollstonecraft pleads for co-education and intensive scientific training for girls. Technological training, scientific training, training in educational institutions, teaching learning process, they should be a part of it. In a family, whatever education is given to the male child, The same education should be given to the female child, because male and female are equal. Let me tell you, your attention please. The class which I have tomorrow, that is on 26th, shall not be held tomorrow, but it will be held on 29th August. Sorry, 29th August at 4 p.m. Are you clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Tomorrow's class shall be held on 29th at 4 o'clock. Remember, 29th. Okay?
Yes, sir. Okay.
So come prepared for 29th. For tomorrow's class, my class won't be held at 4 o'clock tomorrow because I have some class. Okay? Thank you. So proper education should be given to the men and women equally, the boys and girls equally. Because in most of the families it is noticed, the parents feel that the male child should receive education, should be educated, because after getting education he will get employment and he will earn money and maintain the family. But why should we allow a girl child to study? The girl child will be married, and a girl is meant for marriage. A girl should not be educated. We will try to find out a suitable groom and conduct her marriage. That is the kind of mindset in orthodox societies, in conservative societies, most of the parents feel. But Wollstonecraft argues that this mindset should change. A girl child has the right, or she deserves to be educated in the similar fashion as a male child is getting education. Education should be given in such a manner so that a woman becomes self-reliant, becomes independent. She stands on her own legs. She starts earning money so that if her marital life turns sour, she can stay independently without depending on her husband. So education should prepare a woman not merely for marriage, but also for becoming an ideal citizen, exercising independence, embodying virtue. On marriage and family, Wollstonecraft had a different view. She said, sometimes marriages cause a stumbling block on the path of the independence of a woman. And the woman is made simply a puppet in the hands of her in-laws and husband. So marriage should be viewed in such a manner so that a woman is granted her full independence, full freedom to do any job, to make any business, to join social activities, to join politics or to join legal practice, whatever. She will look after the family and she will take up these jobs if possible. So she should be given the full freedom. There should not be any moratorium. There should not be any restriction on the liberty of a woman. In other words, Mary Wollstonecraft argued in favor of the independence of women, the freedom of women in regard to education, in regard to profession, in regard to family matters. Wollstonecraft calls for or pleads for, advocates for a kind of marriage based on mutual respect. mutual understanding, mutual trust, and equality. There should not be any dominance. Both the sides, the groom side and the bride side, they must treat each other in an equal manner. No one is considered as more important than the other. Mary Wollstonecraft says that women should be treated as the human beings embodying virtue, embodying sensibility, embodying the power of judgment. They should deserve, or they deserve, to embody the virtues which are embodied by their male counterparts as well. But to judge the virtue of a woman and to judge the virtue of a man, separate parameters should never be used. The virtue of man and the virtue of woman should be judged on one parameter only. There can't be two parameters. A woman should be allowed to blend her enlightenment with rationality, with self-confidence, with courage of conviction, and with personal judgment. She should be allowed to exercise her discretion, her wisdom, exercise her sagacity, exercise her power of judgment. At no point of time, the voice of a woman should be throttled or suppressed. A woman should be allowed to indulge in her own fancy, indulge in her own pastime, indulge in her own games or choicest things such as painting, drawing, reading, creative writing, etc. So this book of Mary Wollstonecraft, Vindication of the Right of a Woman, is an iconic text, and this is the foundational feminist criticism. This is the foundational text for feminist theory or the theory of feminism. This book laid the intellectual foundations for the feminist movement at a subsequent stage. It was a very radical book, or a book containing with radical views, which inspired the feminist critics at a later stage. This is indeed a very wonderful work of feminist criticism. Now we'll take up the book A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This is a feminist work also. Virginia Woolf is a feminist writer, a novelist. So Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own, it is equally a foundational text like that of Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of a Woman. This A Room of One's Own is a foundational text of feminist literary criticism. It is in fact based on the lectures that Virginia Woolf has delivered at Cambridge in 1928. This book was published in 1929. and she was giving a talk on the topic women and fiction. The essay blends fiction, history, criticism, autobiography, and argues for the intellectual and creative freedom of women. These lectures by Virginia Woolf, delivered at Cambridge University on the topic Women and Fiction, dealt with the intellectual and creative freedom of women. Virginia Woolf argues that a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. So Virginia Woolf has, referred to the existential problem. What is the existential problem? Existential problem is food, cloth, and shelter. First of all, you should have food. If you have not eaten today, you can't sit in the class. Even if you are sitting in the class, you cannot concentrate on your studies because you are feeling hungry. Similarly, if you don't have a proper piece of cloth to wear, you cannot come out. And in the same fashion, same manner, if you don't have a roof over your head, a room of your own, you cannot take rest, nor can you write anything. So she argued that a woman must have money and he should have a room of her own if she wants to be a fiction writer, a novelist. So in other words, she pleaded for economic independence and personal space for a woman in order to become a novelist or writer. These are the essential things for a woman to develop her creative abilities. The creative ability can only come to the fore when a woman has economic independence and personal space. Virginia Woolf discussed that how in the past women were denied access to education and financial resources. In the past days, in the early days, what happened? The women were required to do household chores, household works, nurture the children, prepare food for the family, look after the health of her husband, the well-being of the family, but she cannot interfere in anything. If she wanted money, she would ask her husband to give her some money. She did not have economic independence. And women were not given education also. They were not sent to school or college. In the earlier days, most of the women used to be illiterate or just literate, just literate or semi-literate. But now, the women are almost granted equal opportunity with men. History proves that very few women writers, because of social conditions, prevented them from writing. Most of the women writers could not write because of the adverse social conditions. What is the adverse social condition? They don't have time because they are always busy in family affairs, in preparing food, looking after the household affairs, nourishing the children, sending them to school, looking after her husband, and all other family members. So, even if they were interested to write, they could not write because they did not have the opportunity to write. Wolfe imagines Shakespeare's sister, Judith Shakespeare, was very talented, but it so happened she was denied education and forced into marriage. Her marriage was unsuccessful and she was driven to despair. Here, Virginia Woolf is giving the example of Judith Shakespeare. Judith Shakespeare happens to be the sister of William Shakespeare. She was very talented and she wanted to write something, indulge in creative writing. But it so happened she was denied education. She was not sent to school or college, for which she could not write anything. She was forced to marry, and her marriage proved to be unsuccessful. So she spent her time in despair. This is one of the examples how patriarchal dominance has prevented the women from getting education or becoming writers. Men had libraries. They visit libraries, visit universities. Men have wealth, while women were deprived of those things. Women cannot visit libraries. They don't join the universities because they are denied education. They do not have proper wealth, adequate wealth, and they are confined to domestic responsibilities. So Virginia Woolf examines how men have portrayed women in literature as stereotypes. That is the reason why the male writers, they have portrayed women in literature as stereotypes, such as temptress, seductress, beloved, muse, angel, rather than real human beings. Now, Virginia Woolf is addressing the women, calling upon the women to write their own truths, but they should not play a second fiddle to men. They should have original thoughts. Virginia Woolf is very critical of the androgynous mind, a mind which always promotes male dominance, a mind which always suppresses feminine voice, a mind which always causes bias against female gender. So, Virginia Woolf uses fictional devices, irony and wit to drive home her points, to illustrate her points. And this is definitely A Room of One's Own is a pioneering feminist text that focuses on the link between gender economics and creativity. This book, Room of One's Own, influenced, impacted feminist critics and writers like Simone de Beauvoir, Helen Showalter, Helen Sixers, Lewis Irigaray, etc. at a later stage. So this is definitely a very significant feminist text written by Virginia Woolf. We'll take up now another book by Simone de Beauvoir named The Second Sex. Simone de Beauvoir has written a book in 1949, it was published. The name of the book is The Second Sex. This is also a very significant contribution to the world of feminism, modern feminism. The second sex combines philosophy, history, sociology, psychology, and literature. And it analyzes the condition of women across the cultures, across the ages, across the globe. This book was published in the post-war period. You know, the Second World War came to an end in the year 1945. It began in 1939, it ended in 1945. And Simone de Beauvoir published her book The Second Sex in 1949. So this is a post-World War book. And that was the time when people began to re-evaluate the role of women after the World War. Simone de Beauvoir was greatly influenced by existentialism, especially by the great philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre is the father of existentialism, and Simone de Beauvoir followed the existential philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. She applied existential concepts of freedom, subjectivity, and the other to the situation of women. How does she argue? She wanted that the women lacked freedom. She argued that the women were subject to subordination. She argued that the women were treated as the other. Women have historically been defined not as autonomous beings, but as the other in relation to men, who are taken as the norm one. When does the other come? The other comes when one is there. We say one and the other, or one another, isn't it? So male is considered as one and female is considered as the other. It means a woman doesn't have the autonomous entity. So she is considered as the other. Men are essential, absolute, and they are the subject, main subject. But women are considered as object, as relative, as inessential. This process of othering explains women's oppression across history. So Simone de Beauvoir is very critical of this attitude of male members, male writers, and the society dominated by males. The second sex is divided into two volumes. Volume 1 is entitled as Facts and Myths. It deals with biological, psychoanalytic, historical, materialistic explanations of womanhood. So in volume 1, Simone de Beauvoir deals with the biological issues, psychoanalytic problems, historical factors, and materialistic explanations of womanhood. And it also critiques the myths about women in philosophy, religion, and literature. She makes reference to Eve, makes reference to Muse, eternal feminine, Pandora, etc. Then in volume 2, she describes the stages of women's lives, lived experience. Volume 2 deals with the lived experience of a woman, what kind of life she has led. Obviously, she leads the life as it is led by a man. For example, childhood, adolescence, sexual initiation, marriage, motherhood, old age. These are some of the stages a woman usually lives like the man. Simone de Beauvoir also discusses how society systematically shapes the role of a woman to become independent and passive. Society doesn't give them any privilege. Society doesn't give them any freedom. Society doesn't give the women any right to lead an active life, to lead an independent life. So Beauvoir criticizes society for the role given to the women as a role of dependence, a role of passivity, a role of silence, a role of marginalization, a role of poor creature, helpless creature, voiceless creature. So here we find various aspects such as one versus the other. The central concept of Simone de Beauvoir's second sex is one versus the other. Then the myth of eternal feminine. If there is an unchanging nature of womanhood, a woman needs to be subordinate, a woman needs to remain silent, a woman needs to remain as the other. Then becoming a woman, the famous statement, one is not born but rather becomes a woman. Beauvoir gave a wonderful statement, a biblical statement. One is not born but rather becomes a woman. Gender identity is socially constructed, not biologically determined. Of course, there are certain biological features which differentiate a man from a woman, but gender discrimination is made by the society, by the people, especially the male members, especially the patriarchal dominance, which brings out the difference between man and a woman. Then confinement to domesticity. Women are not allowed to come out of the cocoon of the family. They are denied education. They are not motivated to learn. There is no motivation from family members to study, learn, and become independent. Rather, they are asked to look after the family, to breed children, and to serve the husband. Then freedom, creativity, active projects in the world, they should transcend, go beyond their defined roles of domesticity. They should work for their freedom, try to achieve freedom, and if they have creative talent, they should try to flourish their own creative talent through their own efforts. And patriarchal forces should be subjugated. They should give a fitting reply to the patriarchal forces which are standing as a stumbling block in the progress of the women. Patriarchy forces women into immanence. True equality means, viewer said, true equality can be brought about when the women are given economic independence and they are allowed to participate in professional activities, and they should be made free from the myths of femininity. Femininity is a myth. That myth should be exploded. So this book, the second sex, was a pioneering work to bring about the second wave feminism in the 60s and 70s. It influenced thinkers like Betty Friedan, Simone de Beauvoir was a great source of influence for the thinkers like Betty Friedan, who wrote her book, The Feminine Mystic. It's a path-breaking book, mind-blowing book. This book remains as a cornerstone of feminist theory, hallmark of feminist theory, although some critics used to consider it as Eurocentric and it dismisses motherhood. Still then, it is definitely a great work to promote second wave of feminism. We will now analyze the essay of Ellen Showalter, Feminist Criticism in the Wilderness. Ellen Showalter, another feminist critic, she has written a wonderful essay which talks about the wilderness in feminist criticism. The title of the essay is Feminist Criticism in the Wilderness. It's a foundational text in feminist literary theory. This essay was written in 1981. This was written at a time when feminist literary criticism was emerging as a distinct discipline. The contours of feminist criticism has already been drawn. The contours of the boundaries of feminist criticism have already been drawn in the 80s when this essay was written. Ellen Showalter wanted to define the scope, the method, the purpose, especially in relation to the mainstream criticism, that is male-dominated criticism. She distinguishes between feminist critic and gynocriticism. Feminist critic relates to the literature from the lens of a feminist, and gynocriticism is the criticism which studies women as writers, as creators of the text and producers of meaning. So gynocriticism deals with the writers or the literature which is written by women writers, which is produced by the women writers or published by the women writers. Showalter uses the image of wilderness to describe feminist criticism. Why does he use the term wilderness? It signifies that marginalization of women critics outside the male canon, and possibility of a fertile space for new thought. The women who have been marginalized, they should get a chance to come out in the open and to carve out a niche for themselves in the creative landscape. She talked about two modes of feminist criticism. One mode is the feminist critique, which concerns itself with how women are represented in male authored texts. The texts which are written by male writers, how are the women represented? That is discussed in feminist critique. What kind of images are used? How women are used as stereotypes? How they are used as the object of oppression? Then she discusses gynocriticism. Gynocriticism focuses on women's writing. The literature is written by women. Theme, style, genre, tradition, everything is determined by the women. Gynocriticism studies the female experience and develops a female-centered critical discourse. Simone de Beauvoir goes beyond androcentric models. She is gynocentric. Her views are gynocentric. Male critics often tried to universalize their theories, such as Freud, Marx, Ferdinand de Saussure, neo-critics like Eliot, Richards, and Levish. But such type of critics, they ignored gender differences. They never talked about women. Showalter argues that feminist criticism must avoid being parasitic on male models. It should establish women's literary tradition as autonomous, not derivative. Women writers should not serve as a parasite for male writers. They should never choose the models fixed by the male writers. In other words, they should have their own innovation. They should have their own theme, which should be unique, which should be novel, which should be innovative, which should be original. They should not borrow the theme from the male writers. And feminist criticism should establish women's literary tradition. So Walter proposed 4 models of difference for analyzing women's writings. The first one, she says, is biological difference. How female body and sexuality shapes creativity. Then linguistic difference. How women use a language differently from the perspective of women. Then psychoanalytic difference. How female psyche, female identity, female subjectivity is reflected in the female writing. This article marked a shift from the first wave to second wave. First wave was representation focused. Second wave of feminism was woman centered, theoretical, and it pioneered the field of gynocriticism, study of women as producer of text, not just the subjects within them. It emphasized creating female literary tradition, and it inspired later developments like intersectional feminism, a creature feminine, and post-colonial feminist criticism. So she has suggested in her essay, Feminist Criticism in Wilderness, she has suggested that women should move beyond male-defined models. Women should study women as writers, not as characters. Feminist criticism should explore biological, linguistic, psychoanalytic, and cultural dimensions of women's writing. It should embrace the wilderness as a fertile ground for innovation and independence in literary criticism. So this is how Ellen Showalter has been talking about the, feminism in wilderness. Then we'll take up what are the feminist concerns in India today. Since we are Indians, we have every right to consider the feminism concerns or the feminist concerns in India today. However, the feminist concerns in India are found to be very complex. They are shaped by intersections of gender, caste, class, creed, religion, region. And there are certain major concerns. What are the major concerns in India relating to feminism today? There is gender-based violence. Nowadays you find everywhere the women are subjected to violence, exploitation, murder, burning, dowry harassment, etc. High rates of sexual harassment, domestic violence, marital rape, and acid attacks, burning are the pressing issues nowadays in India. Safety of women in public spaces, lack of effective legal redressal mechanisms continue to be debated. There is lack of legal redressal mechanism in India for which women are the victims. Safety of women in public spaces is not ensured, is not safeguarded. Although there is guarantee in the Constitution, equal opportunity for women and men, implementation of women-centric laws such as dowry prohibition, workplace harassment, domestic violence are not properly executed. The constitutional guarantees. What are the constitutional guarantees? Dowry prohibition, workplace harassment, domestic violence, all those things are there as law, but these laws are not properly implemented, for which the women are harassed, oppressed, and become the victim of male violence. Delays in justice and victim blaming attitudes discourage women from seeking help. Nowadays, if a woman is subject to domestic violence, if she goes to the police station, the police will look askance at her. The police will try to find out her faults, and the woman will lose her trust on police or legal procedure. And the next time she falls a victim, she thinks 100 times before going to the police station to lodge a complaint against her husband. So this victim blaming attitude and the delay in imparting justice are the major impediments for women to seek legal redressal. There is another factor which Indian women are facing today. There is economic inequality. Women are not considered economically equal with their male counterparts. Female labor force participation in India is among the lowest globally. A woman laborer earns less than a male laborer. If the male laborer is paid 600 rupees per day, a female laborer is paid 500 rupees a day. Why this discrimination? Women face wage gaps, lack of property ownership, and limited access to credit. The domestic workers, the domestic servants, maid servants, etc., they are not given proper protection, for which sometimes they become victims of violence. Dalits, Adivasis, minority women, they face double discrimination. One is gender discrimination and the other is caste discrimination. Violence against the lower class women highlights the structural inequalities. So what happens? There is continuous violence or increasing violence against the women belonging to the lower caste. Underrepresentation of women in politics. In politics in India nowadays, you find reservation for women is very less. So their participation in politics is also less compared to the male counterparts. In the field of corporate leadership, in the field of media, the participation of women is very minimal. Despite Women's Reservation Bill 33% in legislatures being passed in 2023, implementation is not made till now. Patriarchal practices like child marriage, honor killings, preference for songs, restrictions of women's mobility are persisting even today. In the middle part of 21st century, even the women are subjected to the age-old superstitions such as child marriage. Child marriage is still in vogue in India. Honor killings. If the girl marries a lower caste husband, then she is killed. People prefer sons to daughters. Termination of fetus. Termination of pregnancy. Pregnancy test, illegal pregnancy test is made. If the fetus is a girl child, female child, then it is terminated. Then women are not allowed proper mobility. If they want to go out, they have to seek permission from the family members, from father or husband. If she is an unwed woman, she will seek permission from father. If she is a wedded woman, she will seek permission from her husband. Media often reinforces the stereotypical gender roles. Although female voice is growing stronger on online portals, yet media makes a stereotypical hype of gender discrimination. Maternal mortality has improved, but access to quality health care in rural areas remains inadequate. Maternity care in rural areas is very poor. As a result, most of the mothers, pregnant mothers, they are unable to deliver the child or they die during the delivery of the child due to malnutrition or lack of proper maternal care. Menstrual health taboos continue. Abortion rights are not given. Lack of awareness on reproductive autonomy remains central. About their menstrual health, the women cannot discuss it publicly. They can only discuss it with the doctor, that too in a hushed voice. Then social media has amplified feminist voices like Me Too India, how there is casting couch, how in the films the producer or the director, they exploit the heroines sexually, and they motivate the heroines to be sexually exploited so that they will be given roles. At the same time, women activists, journalists, and ordinary users, they face also trolling, online abuse, cyberbullying, etc. They are subjected to such type of victimization. Female literacy is rising, no doubt. But at the same time, the female dropout rate in schools and colleges is very high. In rural areas, among the marginalized communities, especially the scheduled tribes, scheduled castes, they never allow the girl children to go to school or college. Although government is providing so many incentives to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribe girl children with stipend and other things, they are not tempted, they are not interested to join because their parents lack awareness. Now, gender gap continues in higher education. Male students are more in number compared to the female students. Women in rural areas, in tribal areas, they play key roles in environmental movements. They try to protect the environment. They try to plant the trees. There is no doubt about it. But their number is too small. Climate change disproportionately affects women in agrarian and coastal communities. In coastal communities, the climate change also affects the women. So as a result, when we analyze very broadly about the feminist problem or feminist issues in India, we find that women in India are not in a very comfortable position. They need to have equity, inclusivity, accessibility, intersectionality, social justice, and they should be granted freedom. They should be motivated to receive education. Government should create awareness among their parents so that the parents send their children, girl children, to the schools. What happens in remote tribal areas? The tribal parents, they never send their girl children to the school. They ask their girl children to go to the forest and collect sal leaves. After they come back with the sal leaves, they sell those sal leaves and earn nearly 500 to 600 rupees per day. And their argument is, if my girl child or my daughter is able to earn 5 or 600 rupees per day going to the forest, collecting sal leaves, why should she go to the school? What will she get from the school? Although school education is free, even then, by going to school, she doesn't have any immediate gain. They hardly understand that the gain is remote. They will receive education, they will become qualified, and they will become employed. After they become employed, they will earn money and finance their family. So this is how this superstitious belief continues in India. Today we will stop here. Tomorrow's class will not be held. Tomorrow's class shall be held on 29th August at 4 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir,
Thank
20
you, sir.
minutes.
Thank you, sir.